Okay. Here we go. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. On today's episode, I speak with Sam Michael, Executive Director for the China market at AtmosAir Solutions, a leading air purification technology brand from the United States. Sam made his foray into China in 2008 working in real estate, both with Asia's largest industrial developer and one of Europe's most successful luxury outlet developers. He was then brought on board AtmosAir Solutions Shanghai office as Executive Director of Sales and Operations in 2015. We discuss air quality and pollution in China, key mistakes Western organizations make when they take on projects in China, how to manage relationships with Chinese government officials, why it's important to be on the ground in the country when doing business with China, and how AtmosAir Solutions sales funnels differ in China versus the US. And fun fact, we perhaps for the first time on this podcast, called The Negotiation, actually talk about negotiating, talking about what it's like to negotiate deals in China. Enjoy.
I know that they have an intent to continue to clean the air, and they've said a lot of things, and I have seen big improvements in the last couple of years, but they've also made indications that because of coronavirus, they will prioritize the economy a bit more, and those kinds of statements are pretty clear indicators that we're going to see more pollution. I know a lot of people in the business that are cleaning up factory exhaust, cleaning up power plants. Everything I've heard from them is that it's regulated much more strictly than it used to be. It used to be you'd go into the power plant, the inspector for the power plant would tell the power plant when they're coming, and then the power plant would turn on their filters only when the inspector was going to be there. I don't think that's the case now. I've been told they have real-time sensors and they're monitoring that those filters are always on, and that's happening with the smaller but also large polluters. It'd be great if it happens faster, but I think considering how large China is, it's relatively rapid progress.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Sam, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
As we usually do, a little bit of an introduction of yourself, how you came to China, what you've been doing there, how long you've lived there, what cities you've lived in. Tell us everything.
All right. Well, I'm originally from Idaho. I went to school at a little private art school in Texas called Trinity. I got convinced by the head of the language departments to do Chinese as my second language that I needed to take. And I just I won't say I fell in love with it, but I decided I wanted to go all in. I had studied Spanish in high school, and I didn't take that all the way. I'm not fluent in Spanish, but with Chinese, I wanted to get really fluent. So I my junior year, I ended up in Tainan, studying Chinese for a full year, and then went back, graduated, and in 2005 got an internship in Shanghai. So that brought me to Shanghai. That gave me a really solid foundation in Chinese. Worked with a logistics real estate firm there for several years. I've lived in Zhuhai, Taiwan, obviously, Shanghai, and now since 2009, I've been in Suzhou, specifically the Suzhou Industrial Park, which I'm a big advocate of. I really like it here in Suzhou.
Yeah, you were telling me, can we actually even just stop there for a sec? Place Suzhou geographically for people who don't know the area, because you used to live in Shanghai, yeah?
Yep.
Maybe just lay out those differences between the two places.
Sure. My wife's originally from Shanghai, and she's a huge fan of Suzhou now as well. It's very hard to get Shanghainese to like anywhere other than Shanghai, and it's always hard for her to admit it, but she really likes Suzhou. Basically, Suzhou's 70 kilometers west of Shanghai. And it's not in the municipality of Shanghai, but it's at the very southern bit of Jiangsu. What we really like about it here is Suzhou. What they did is they're an old town. They're famous for they've got a city moat. They've got portions of the wall here. They're famous for their silk and a lot of kind of the old parts of China. But what they did is they worked with Singapore in the 90s to develop what's called the Suzhou Industrial Park. And that was a fully planned city focused on the time around industrial. So Singapore kind of guided them on putting the infrastructure in and attracting a lot of manufacturers in terms of high-tech manufacturers. And the industrial park really built up around that. And as time has gone on, some of those industries have moved west, or they've moved out of the country. Many are still here, the more high value-added ones. But it's really developed as a really nice place to live. So it's zoned really well. The residential areas, in terms of their proximity to commercial areas, in terms of their distance from the industrial, which people might not want to be close to, they've done all that and all the infrastructure around it really well. I don't know if you recall Sim City, or if you ever played that game, but I think about it a lot when I think about how Suzhou was designed, or where I live in Suzhou. So they maintain the really nice old places where you can go see the canal streets. But then if you want to live in a really nice area, live in nicer homes, have great access to things and good transportation and infrastructure, I recommend the industrial park.
You're something of a China expert. You've been there for a long time. You've lived in the market for basically 20 years. Now, within the world of business, what are some of the main changes you've seen? Where do you think some of the trends are going in the next 5 to 10 years?
It was interesting to see different changes from, the perspective of the different industries I've been in. So initially we were building logistics real estate. That's where I started with. That's what I started with in China. And pre-2008, our main pitch to investors, or when we were talking about our facilities, was to focus on ports, because pre-2008, it was all about exporting, and that we'd have storage at ports to facilitate exporting of product made in China. Post-2008, where there was, the crisis, we really shifted the focus on our pitch and on where we were investing and on what we were telling investors on our domestic locations. So, and that's continued and will continue in a big way. Domestic consumption is booming, particularly around the, any sort of e-commerce, and all that requires primarily warehouses. So, that was one of the first big shifts I saw in China. I then worked for a company building shopping malls, outlets, and they were, there, the focus and the shift that's happening, and I think will continue to happen, is on experience. On that, you used to go to a mall to buy a thing, and people, that's really not the focus of, retail real estate anymore. If I just want the thing, then I'll just buy the thing online. But people need a place to spend their time. And so, like we've kind of found during the pandemic, it often really sucks to sit around your house all day. And so it's nice to have these retail centers that the focus of what's the tenants there may less and less be about products that you're going to buy, but experiences that you're going to have with them, and also food, F&B. You're seeing a big increase in the F&B in the retail spaces. And then, my current industry is air quality, and that's all about the high, there's certainly a heightened awareness of air quality now. That's continuing. I'd like it to go faster. Air quality is very important to me, and I still don't think people in China understand its importance as much as they should. But it's certainly a trend, and concerns around air quality have accelerated in a big way due to the pandemic. So I expect that to continue in China as well.
Yeah, as you and I both know, air quality might just be one of the biggest concerns, especially for most expats, at least in China, and probably one of the biggest reasons that you and I know of why expats end up leaving China. I mean, it's an amazing place in so many ways. But some of us, and I'm thinking of even myself in particular with my son, just end up not being able to stay for medical reasons and have to leave. So I'm interested. Tell us a little bit about the macro environment of your industry with regards to air quality and the pollution in China in general.
Sure. So we're focused on indoor air quality. We're not trying to clean up outdoor air quality, but indoor air quality in China is influenced in a big way by outdoor air quality. Last year when I returned from 9 months in the States because I was stuck there because of COVID, I was really impressed with China's air quality. And I have an app. I was monitoring the air quality all the time, and it was a lot better last year. I think in many ways that might have been because a lot of factories were shut down. I haven't seen that kind of continue into 2021. The air does seem to be getting a bit worse. They've also made signals. There was an announcement, a headline I read that bothered me a little bit, where they said they want to start taking into account climatic conditions for determining air quality targets for cities. And the reason for that, which is understandable, is the biggest factor in terms of any city and the air pollution that's going to have is the wind. Which direction is the wind blowing? Is the wind blowing? You can see very clearly if Beijing's having a really bad couple of days and it cleans up, I know it's coming to me in Suzhou. I know it's going to be here in a day or two. And sure enough, it always happens. It's usually a wind blowing from the north that's going to blow it down. Recently, for whatever reason, the north's been good, the south's been good, and we haven't been great here in the middle of the country. I'm referring to the middle along the East Coast. And I think it's because the weather patterns are pushing from the south and pushing from the north, and it's kind of building up here. So I know that they have an intent to continue to clean the air, and they've said a lot of things, and I have seen big improvements in the last couple of years, but they've also made indications that because of coronavirus, they will prioritize the economy a bit more now. And those kinds of statements are pretty clear indicators that we're going to see more pollution when they say that kind of thing. So I know a lot of people in the business that are cleaning up, factory exhaust, cleaning up power plants, and everything I've heard from them is that it's regulated much more strictly than it used to be. It used to be you'd go into the power plant, the inspector for the power plant would tell the power plant when they're coming, and then the power plant would turn on their filters only when the inspector was going to be there. I don't think that's the case now. I've been told they have real-time sensors and they're monitoring that those filters are always on. And that's happening with the smaller but also large polluters at factory levels. It'd be great if it happens faster, but I think considering how large China is, it's relatively rapid progress.
Yeah. Can you potentially, and maybe you can't, but can you potentially speak to how pollution is created in China, where it's coming from, the types of pollutants that are harmful or not harmful, and how seasonal can it be? Why is it seasonal? Just on how cities are heated, anything along those lines.
Yeah, sure. I could talk for a few hours about that. These are studies I quote to Chinese people all the time that disregard me and want me to go away. But yeah, there's a study. People north of the Huaihe live on average 5.5 years less than people south of the Huai River. And what they've connected that to is that people north of the Huai River, they are, if they're very rural, they're given coal. If they're live in cities, then they have central heating, but it's all generated from coal-fired plants. So what you have is these very localized boilers that are exhausting all this, smoke from the coal very close to people's homes. And that's happened throughout China for the last, for more than 30 years. When I read the study, which was from like 2012, it was referring to the past 30 years and this research. So it's a very, very substantial impact on people's longevity and quality of life. That's changing. They're shifting to natural gas in a big way. I think some of that natural gas shift, it's frustrating because they get natural gas from Russia and from the U.S. and certainly the U.S. under China. I think they slowed down the shift to natural gas because of Trump, because it was we were a less reliable source of natural gas. That's a very important change, because that type of heating is a massive source of, their particulate pollution. Then whether or not that impacts us south of the Huai River is wind. So the wind invariably will bring that pollution to us. It's just how much. Like I mentioned, if it's really bad up there and it gets good for some reason in the winter, we know it's going to be really bad in the Suzhou, Shanghai area within a day. So, that's heating's a source only in the winter. The, industrial, they talk a lot about construction here, dust from construction sites. I think generally dust is going to be larger particulate matters. And really the idea is that large particles, our systems are designed to handle, because a larger diameter particle, we're talking about PM 2.5 or less versus PM 2.5 or more. So 2.5 is the diameter of the particles in micrometers. Those larger particles, our systems are kind of designed, our mucus and the whole respiratory tract is designed to hopefully capture those and expel them. Smaller than that, it's really hard, and it can go into your lungs, and via your lungs go into your bloodstream, and via your bloodstream go into your organs. So there's studies out of, the UK where they've done autopsies on like people from Manchester that died, and find, in their brains and their organs, concentrations of heavy metals that they can link to when the pollution was really bad in that city. So it really does make a difference. Coal has a lot of heavy metals. China's coal tends to be more, it tends to have even dirtier and have more of that. Other sources are cars. I think because of the EV kind of revolution that's happening here, I think that's one of the major sources of improvements I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis from what's cities and on the skyline, seeing that the air is a bit better. I think there's a shift there. And then the third one that I'll mention is a contributor, or fourth one, is agriculture. So when farmers will often burn their straw, and often they're burning it when it's wet. Often they're burning it at night because it's illegal to burn. And so it's not a very complete combustion process. And so that just ends up generating tons of smoke. That can be another reason we have really bad air in our cities.
You've worked in a few different industries and verticals within your time in China as well. And so you've had a bit of a front seat to a lot of different types of projects. What do you see as some of the key mistakes that Western organizations are making when they take on projects in China?
I think localizing is really important. I've seen different approaches. The approach of, find someone really strong locally and, let them try to figure out how to execute, is certainly the preferred strategy. Not necessarily local. Oftentimes you might need someone like myself, or someone like, a very Americanized Chinese person, or Westernized Chinese person who can really translate what the business is trying to do into local market. But a mistake you often see is that people want to just take whatever they've done abroad and apply it directly in China, and that can often be painful and expensive. So figuring out how to execute and achieve everybody's goals, but in a local way, is probably the number one thing that companies need to do. The other thing I'll mention is finding good partners. That kind of feeds back into localizing, but China's guanxi is a term I'm sure has come up on your podcast in the past. Relationships, knowing people, it's really important here. And it can be very hard for any company to develop those directly themselves. So finding partners that are incentivized to help you build your business and sharing in the fruits of that business with them, I think is probably the quickest way to scale for any company.
A lot of your work is really about managing relationships. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that process is like, if I can call it a process, and how it's different in China.
Just as an anecdote in terms of our business, I'm not great at managing relationships. I wish I were better at it. And it is very important in China. I cover all of Asia for my company. And like I mentioned, last year I was stuck in the US, but our Asia sales, along with the sales for the whole company, went up about 700%. And so I was able to do that from my parents' basement because that's where I was stuck. And that was working through, but most of it there was in other countries that I work with: Singapore, Japan, Australia, Thailand. In China, our sales, we had some decent sales, but it was relatively flat. And I think that's because I wasn't here developing those relationships. In China, for even small deals that we wanted to make happen, it requires several meetings. Whereas in these other countries, I just did Zoom calls and Teams calls, and I was able to close the projects. So I think being on the ground is really important. I think they're really starting to adopt the web calls, but still in China, face-to-face interactions are going to be very important. The other thing you'll hear a lot about is gifts and showing that you're thinking about people and gift giving. I'm really, my wife will tell you I'm terrible at that. I'm not even good at giving her stuff or my kids stuff. I for various economic reasons, I don't like gifts and the concept a lot. So my preferred way with China is that we're managing, to manage those partners I referred to. So partners that are incentivized, and in my case of the business that I'm doing now, dealers. So dealers who, they're incentivized based on successfully selling our product. They have a financial incentive. We have a financial incentive to make them successful. I like to outsource, whatever needs to be done in terms of managing the relationships with the end user. I like to manage that via my dealers. That allows me to really focus on delivering the product, good installations, technical expertise, and service, and let them, who are in many cases, even though I've been here a long time now, they still may be more adept at managing those local relationships. Letting them do that.
That's interesting because gifting is a big part of China. Just think of the holidays, Mooncake Festival or Chinese New Year or something like that. It has to be hard with somebody with your values around consumption and we really don't need more stuff type of approach to be able to skirt that.
Oh, all the time, whether it's my staff or my wife, oftentimes they'll come to me and say, we got to buy something for them or for whoever this is or for whatever, and the idea is that you just have to give them something. They don't need it. And yeah. It may not, for me, we have lots of gifts people have given me and they just sit in a corner and I don't like them. It feeds into this consumption mentality. And there's a huge economic, there's papers and there's a great study that I read on this, but there's maybe someone pays $10 for a gift, but to me, I wouldn't have paid more than $5. That represents a $5 economic loss for that gift to be given to me. And so I morally and financially am opposed to a lot of this, but you got to do it in China. That's why it's good to work with local partners.
How about managing relationships with government? Not only do I want to know what that process is like, advices that you might have, Give us a little bit of your thoughts on that. Can you talk to us a little bit about managing relationships with government?
What I've seen with government, like, again, I'm going to sound like I'm promoting the SIP here, but basically when I was doing retail real estate, the place wasn't built, but I had to lease spaces. So I became a pitchman for the whole SIP and the Suzhou Industrial Park in the area. As a foreign investor coming in, the role the government plays is that they're there to facilitate all of the things you need. There's lots of government requirements. SIP really has a good system for kind of facilitating, how you get in, how you come into this space, and helping you with all that. Some governments more than others. One story that always stuck out on my mind in terms of thinking about government relationships is that you need to be keenly aware of what they want. So if you're meeting them and you're talking to them, think about what their incentives are going to be. I hosted a government from another city with one of our clients. This was at the logistics real estate company, but they visit the client. They see this big, beautiful warehouse. They think it's really cool. The client takes them around, shows them how their whole, all the delivery processes and the technology behind it and the storage and to me, that was all the interesting part. But the senior official from the other city's government just says, how much you pay in taxes each year, right? Like how many people do you employ? Their perspective for this entity was, what I want is they give me lots of tax money and they employ a lot of people. That's their focus, 100%. That's their KPI. That's how they're judged. So, going into any sort of conversation and any sort of that level of relationship development, you kind of need to keep in mind, their boss is leaning on them for something. And what's that going to be? In many cases, it's what they're going to gain in taxes, but in many cases, it might be something more experiential and how it's adding to the environment in this, the city, whether that's a retail environment or a work environment, and then try to think of it from their point of view and assist them with that. I think will help you get further.
We've talked around the particulars of what you actually do and your company. So let's zero in on that. Tell us about your company and the work that you're doing. Your headquarters are in the U.S., but you're in China. As you said, you manage the company throughout China. Why is it important that you are in China as well?
To be successful in China, I'd want a trustworthy local partner here. Having the face-to-face interactions, developing the relationships, that's all a really important reason you'd want to be here. For me, our product is, what we do is bipolar ionization, specifically, and this is important, but nobody will probably remember the name, but is dielectric barrier discharge or tube type bipolar ionization. And what we do is we install our systems in air ducts. So in the existing infrastructure of a building or an office or whatever sort of air conditioning system you have. And then that generates positive and negative oxygen ions, which go out into the air, and they're present in the air. And that's why the business really developed during COVID, is that by the time virus that came out of someone went through a filter in the air conditioning system, it would already be too late. It already would have passed all the people in the space. So what our goal is to put these ions into the space, and these oxygen ions have been shown to deactivate various microorganisms, including coronavirus. And so that's the virus aspect of it. A lot of what we were doing pre-pandemic was post-renovation. So Chinese people are very worried about chemicals and chemical smells from after they renovate an office, for example. So we'd be installed in the air system. The ions would go out into the space and they break down the VOCs. And then we also facilitate a reduction of particles. That being said, you need to, in any given situation, you need a basic level of filtration. So in China, in a lot of these buildings, there's not even a basic level of filter. So even though they have such bad air, they have filters in the air systems that that at most are, would stop a bird from flying in there. So that's always very frustrating when we're looking at any project. Say we're talking to a building or an office, we evaluate the filters they have in place. We evaluate what our systems would be, and then we often install sensors that would monitor the air quality in the space. And the intent there is to really show people that they've got clean air.
Who do you sell to exactly? Like, who are you? Who's the customer? Who's the client? Who do you develop the product for? And then who actually gives you the money?
So our end users are often like offices. So office tenants, occupants. So I won't name anybody you can think that rents an office. They're a potential client because they're going to have, their employees are going to spend 8 to 10 hours a day in that office. When they're in there, I can't, we talked about outdoor air quality in China. I can't control that, but 90% of my time is indoors for most people. And I can control that. And it's not that hard and it's not that expensive. And then that 10% of the time that you're outdoors, that's not a big deal. When I'm back home, I measure the air quality all the time. And, when my mom cooks in the house, the particles will go up. So I think everybody's exposed to particles at some point all the time. My goal for me personally and for our clients is that we minimize the pollution that people are exposed to when they're indoors. Since the pandemic happened, more and more of our clients are real estate developers. So we go from talking about 1 to 3 floors of an office building to talking about the whole office building. And that's been a source of business developing so fast, because for those developers, they want to communicate to the market. Commercial real estate is already under threat. A lot of, work from home is working for a lot of people. But these buildings need to remain relevant. And the buildings that are going to remain relevant and occupied are going to be using systems like ours and speaking specifically to concerns of employees, which is, how do I know that this space is safe? One that we work with very closely is the Empire State Realty Trust. They own lots of buildings in New York and the Northeast, and they install our systems and go to the market and say, hey, we've got social distancing, we've got hand sanitizer stations, but we also have this system in the air conditioning that's generating ions and reducing the amount of infectious agents in the air. And that becomes part of their marketing pitch.
A lot of the effort of this podcast to disseminate learning and bridge the cultural gap is through an exposition of the differentiation between the two cultures. How would what you do let's just examine your sales funnel from beginning to end. How would it differ if what you were doing was in America versus what you're doing in China?
Certainly what we found, for our systems specifically and what we're doing is demand for local data. I could give them, we've been in the States a long time, so we have a lot more data out of the US. So I can give them 20 different studies showing great results. And then the next question will be, well, show me this from China, or show me from a client in China, as though, our systems would for some reason work in the United States, but not work in China. But honestly, that's pretty consistent across all the Asian countries. Every country we work with wants to generate local data. They want to test it in their own office. To me, there's certainly a lot of suspicion here, and which is kind of to be expected because it is air. Literally, we're selling air and clean air. But I feel like for my colleagues in the States, given our background there, they're able to accept it a lot more. Because there's all these installations and all this data, and it's in the same country that they're in. One thing I would, maybe that might be useful for the listeners is our experience has been try to get something in any country, especially China, get an install, get a flagship, get somewhere. Speaking of negotiation, we might get really aggressive on our terms with someone in exchange for extensive, site visits, them allowing us to market their name, bring clients by. They might even meet or talk to the client, becoming a great reference. It's really important to have that strong local case. I think I'm assuming in anything you're selling, but certainly for me and air quality.
We've ruined the earth and made land extremely valuable. And then we ruined water and made water something economically viable to sell. And now we're selling clean air because we've ruined the air. And what's next? What are we going to be ruining to make it valuable next?
Yeah, well, I don't usually put what you just said in such dire terms, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the way for what we're doing and the way I think about it is 100 years ago, people just wanted to eat food and be full, and then they needed to be clean, so the food wasn't actively harming you, and then now we care about vitamins and superfoods and all these things. So I see this kind of with food. First I need to be full, then I need it to be clean and not hurt me, and now I want it to make me healthier, right? And with water, it's been a similar thing. You're right, like 30 years ago when I first heard people were drinking bottled water, everybody I talked to, I just remember talking about how crazy it is that people pay money for water. And now I probably at least have a bottle of water every day. And that's going from I'm thirsty to, I just need something to quench the thirst to water that's clean. And now you'll see water. Now they're talking about water with minerals, but there's also pH in water is a big thing. The alkalinity of the water is something that's relevant and important. And with air, honestly, I project the same sort of process, which is no one was thinking about it. I just need to breathe. I can't suffocate. And then hopefully soon people want it to be clean. Ions and oxygen ions, what we do, I see what our role not only is cleaning the air, but also sort of as an elevated pH of the air. I don't think, for us and what we do, what I like about our technology is that I'm not married to places with bad outdoor air because we're not going to stop people from being inside. We're going to be inside a lot. We need to air condition we need to be in controlled environments. And even if you're in a very clean place, the indoor air concentration of ions can be very low. And then there's all the contaminant risks of VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and microorganisms. So, I'm not rooting for bad outdoor air because it might be good for my business. I'm rooting for very, very good outdoor air because either way, there's certainly a space for our business. In terms of your specific question, what's going to be next? I don't know. If I knew, I'd certainly want to figure out how to invest in it. But I hope there's not more stuff that we ruin and need to commoditize.
This podcast is called The Negotiation. And, one archetype of guest and one dialogue of interest that we've never really done is talk about negotiating. We've managed to go almost 100 episodes now without ever actually talking about the topic of negotiation and negotiating, especially when it comes to doing it inside China. Now, you've done a lot of contract work in China, obviously, which in essence, at least not is all about negotiation, but certainly is a big part of doing deals. So let's talk a little bit about how a negotiation happens between two parties in China. What's the process like? Do deals get signed really quickly? Do you use special pens with special ink? Is it really slow? Is there something of a feeling out period? Do you have to go and do the round table dinners and drink a lot of baijiu? How can you ensure that deals are structured as win-win? Or is that even a goal? Can you talk to us about negotiating in China?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what anyone will say about China, you typically hear the importance of relationships. Often you might hear that, once you have something on paper, that's just the beginning of the negotiation. There will continue to be negotiations. I've read that in a few books. I don't think that's wrong. I think I appreciate it about China. I don't, since I haven't worked in the States extensively, I'm not sure how much this is the case there, but I think it is much more so in China. The importance of developing a relationship. I appreciate that it's kind of not only fun, but often important to get drunk with someone or at least spend some time with them to get a feeling for them as an individual, their goals, what they're going to want, and just knowing them. It's much harder to let someone down or cheat them or not pay them or pay them late if you've developed a rapport and a relationship. So I really enjoy and like, again, this happened a lot more pre-pandemic, but the big dinners where you do a lot of that relationship development. In terms of negotiations specifically, for me and the approach I like to take, the more points that we're negotiating on is often the better, so that there's always an ability to exchange, and clearly knowing for yourself what's really important for you, and knowing and then ideally having some idea of what's really important for them. Oftentimes you might be at a crossroads on a contract, or it can't close, it can't sign, but maybe I need this price, but they need longer terms, and that might work for both of us. Or maybe you want to add even more sort of variables into the discussion, which I alluded to earlier. If price is a huge issue or terms are a huge issue, what are the things that are non-financial that don't cost them a lot, but will give me a lot for my business, in terms of them helping me promote my business, in terms of allowing visits or talking to potential clients, adding those, kind of putting those on the table as things that are valuable to me, and we can negotiate or do exchanges for. To me, that's important, and really that can be a useful approach to any negotiation. Ultimately, in terms of signing, people may or may not know, in China it's all a chop. That's always confusing to people in the States. A chop is a stamp that you put on a contract, and really the contract's not signed until it has the chop, and they don't usually even care if your signature's on it. They need to see that company seal pressed onto the contract. So a verb that you'll use when you're in China is, did they chop the contract? Did they chop the PO? And that's always just referring to, getting that stamp to verify that the company has approved this.
And it's not even directly on one page. They'll fan it,
yes,
a little bit, so that stamp covers multiple pages, and they'll drop it right on that fanned out part of the contract and do it that way.
Exactly.
That's definitely getting into the weeds and very granular understanding of experience in China. Something that we've both had, but I agree that there's so much to be said about building rapport. I think that's probably one of my specialties, even as a podcast host. And I think I refined a lot of that skill being in China, of being able to build a rapport. And you mentioned it's not even necessarily about getting drunk. It's about letting your guard down and not being vulnerable per se, but being honest and genuine, and being able to open up about something other than work. Don't bring the conversation to the table. Don't try to interject and get the conversation about the contract or something going. Relax, enjoy, be yourself. Just let there be a familiarity and a comfortableness that kind of envelops the room for a little while around a meal and some fun. And generally, the person that you're trying to get to sign a PO or a contract will invite that conversation to the table when they feel ready. And then that's your opening. Now we can start talking about it. And you've accomplished your task of being at least not even liked, but respected enough to do business with.
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, often the business piece of any conversation, it may or may not even happen at the dinner. And if it does, it's the last 2 to 5% of the conversation. You might just kind of wrap up, hey, I'll send that summary to you, or this or that, or you'll come to our factory on X date, or I'll visit the site on Y date, and that's it. That's all that's said about whatever business you were trying to accomplish.
I mean, it's the epitome of those sales guru books from the 90s of, they're not buying your product, they're buying you.
Yeah.
And that is so true in China right now, still.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It can make it much less efficient. So again, that's where my focus has certainly shifted to some of the other countries where I don't need to invest that kind of time, but can still get really good results because, it can be very time consuming. It's fun and I like it. But I also have kids and I like being home, before 9:00 too.
In a country that doesn't necessarily rely on the rule of law so much as Western countries do, that is part and parcel, because that almost takes the place of the rule of law and everything is inside a contract. So we can rely on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the West could certainly do with a bit more socializing added to any negotiation or conversation. I think it's much easier to be snippy in writing or on the phone if you haven't kind of connected with someone on some other level. And, that's never good for anything, especially getting business done. So I like what China does in that respect.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Sometimes it's just a good excuse to go and have a good meal and drink too much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you know what? Thanks very much for indulging me there. We got to kind of check off that checkbox of, hey, the negotiation has actually now talked about negotiating in China. So thank you for that. I've always wanted to get that part out of the way. It only took 100 episodes to do so. If you don't mind, give us one or two other guests that you might recommend for this podcast that you might like to listen to yourself.
Sure. I've thought of 3 different guys I might recommend. I don't know.
Call them out.
I don't know their positions. I have a friend. He's in Seattle now, Mike Grigg, but he does a lot of HR training. So, he's does a lot of big organizational trainings with big companies, and he's very strong in that area and has done it in China for a long time. An old China hand that figured out how to move back there, but also continue his business here. Brad Fleeling, which I'm not sure that I'm saying it right. He's moved to Austin. A lot of these guys are figuring out how to move back, but still do their China business. He hosts does a lot of experiential trips for people from the West.
Oh yeah.
Going in, he'll work with universities in the West that want to send kids to China to learn about the schools or business in China, as well as I think he has some other businesses that are pretty interesting. He's an interesting guy. And then I don't know if you've ever heard of the Lost in America podcast or Turner Sparks. He set up Mr. Softy, which is an ice cream trucks. He set it up in Suzhou, and just has really hilarious stories from that, which he then turned into a career as a comedian. He lives in New York now, but for several years he developed this business of Mr. Softy ice cream trucks in Suzhou, and they're still around here. But I was thinking specifically of his story and issues with the government that really he had very substantial issues with the government and his business that I think would make for a really interesting podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Sam. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. That was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。